The alien fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel like a pack of wolves emerging from a dark forest. 12 ships materialized in the outer system, their hulls reflecting starlight in ways that hurt to look at directly. But it was the 13th ship that made everyone on the bridge of the new frontier stop breathing. The Worldbreaker was not just large, it was impossible. The ship stretched across space like a metal moon, its surface covered in structures that twisted geometry in directions that human eyes couldn't follow properly. Energy crackled along its hull in patterns that seemed almost alive. "How big is that thing?" Captain Hayes whispered. Danny Rodriguez checked his sensors 3 times before answering. "Best estimate, about 400 kilometers long, maybe bigger. My equipment keeps giving me error messages." Jake Morrison stood quietly next to his coffee machine, watching the display screen. The Worldbreaker hung in space like a predator studying its prey. Around it, the smaller alien ships moved in perfect formation, their movements coordinated with inhuman precision. A new transmission came through the communication system. The voice that spoke was translated by computer, but something cold and arrogant came through even the mechanical translation. "Primitive humans of this system, I am Admiral Zekthar of the Veltar Dominion. Your species has spread like a disease across worlds that belong to greater beings. This ends now." The transmission showed the inside of an alien ship. Admiral Zekthar stood 8 feet tall, his blue-gray skin marked with intricate patterns that seemed to shift in the light. His eyes were large and dark, lacking any warmth or mercy. "You will surrender all colonies in this sector immediately. Your ships will be destroyed. Your people will be relocated to serve as laborers for superior species. Any resistance will result in the complete elimination of your worlds." Jake took a sip of his coffee. It was getting cold, but he barely noticed. Admiral Zekthar continued speaking. "To demonstrate the futility of resistance, observe." The Worldbreaker's main weapon began to charge. Energy gathered along the massive ship's central spine, building, to levels that made the New Frontier's sensors scream warnings. The weapon fired a brief pulse at a small asteroid floating in the outer system. The asteroid, roughly the size of a city block, simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not broken apart. It was there one moment and gone the next, leaving only empty space and a brief flash of light. "Your technology is primitive," Admiral Zekthar said with obvious contempt. "Your weapons are toys. Your ships are barely capable of crossing the void between stars. What could creatures like you possibly do against the might of the Veltar Dominion?" The transmission ended, leaving the bridge of the New Frontier in stunned silence. Mining Director Helen Carter was the first to speak. "We need to start the evacuation immediately. How many transport ships do we have?" 6, Captain Hayes replied. "They can carry maybe 300 people each if we pack them tight." "That's less than 2,000 people," Carter said, her voice hollow. "We have 15,000 on the surface." Jake finished his coffee and walked over to the sensor station where Rodriguez was studying the alien fleet's energy patterns. "Danny, are you getting good readings on their power signatures?" Rodriguez nodded. "Yeah, but Jake, these numbers don't make sense. They're using more energy just to hover there than our entire ship generates in a week." "Show me," Jake said. The sensor data flowed across Rodriguez's screen in complex waves and patterns. Jake studied them carefully, his engineer's mind automatically, looking for connections and relationships. "Interesting," he murmured. "Kelly, come look at this." Kelly Barnes joined them at the sensor station. "What am I supposed to be seeing?" Jake pointed at several peaks in the energy readings. "See how their power output stays perfectly stable? No fluctuations, no variations. It's like they have infinite energy to work with." "Is that bad?" Kelly asked. "Maybe. Or maybe it's the opposite." Jake rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Perfect systems are usually the most fragile ones. They don't know how to handle unexpected inputs." Captain Hayes joined their small group. "Jake, I need you to be straight with me. Do we have any chance at all against that fleet?" Jake looked at the display showing the world breaker hanging in space like a mechanical god. "Captain, the smart thing to do would be to run. Load up the transports, grab as many people as we can, and get out of here." "But," Hayes prompted, "but I keep thinking about what that alien said, about humans being primitive, about our technology, being toys." Jake's voice was calm, but there was something hard underneath it. "People have been underestimating human engineers for a long time. Usually works out poorly for them." Sam Tucker, the ship's veteran mechanic, had been listening, quietly from his position near the environmental controls. "Jake, you got that look in your eyes, the same one you had when you fixed the reactor with nothing but spare parts and stubbornness." Jake smiled. "Sam, remember what I always say about impossible problems? They're just problems that haven't met the right human yet," Sam replied with a grin. Rodriguez looked up from his sensor readings. "Jake, I'm getting more detailed scans of their technology now. Whatever they're using for power, it operates on extremely precise frequencies. Everything has to be perfectly tuned or the whole system fails. Like a musical instrument," Jake said thoughtfully. "Hit the wrong note and the whole song falls apart." Kelly was beginning to understand. "You think we can disrupt their system somehow?" "Maybe. The question is how." Jake walked back to his coffee machine and started another, pot brewing. "Kelly, you remember when I told you this old machine was over-engineered?" "You've mentioned it a few times," Kelly said carefully. Jake opened the side panel of the coffee machine, revealing a complex array of components that definitely hadn't come from any kitchen appliance manufacturer. "The heating elements in here aren't from Earth. I salvaged them from a crashed research ship about 5 years ago, military project that got shut down." Hayes stepped closer to look at the strange components inside the coffee machine. "What kind of military project?" "The kind that tries to build weapons out of quantum mechanics," Jake replied. "Never worked right as a weapon, but it makes fantastic coffee." Rodriguez was staring at his sensor readings with a strange expression on his face. "Jake, if these readings are right, your coffee machine is generating quantum interference patterns every time it heats water." "That's why the coffee tastes so good," Jake said proudly. "Perfect molecular alignment in every cup." "But Jake," Rodriguez continued, "these patterns, they're almost identical to the base frequency that the alien ships are using for their power systems." The bridge fell silent except for the quiet hum of the coffee machine finishing its brewing cycle. Jake poured himself a fresh cup and took a slow sip. "Danny, what would happen if we could amplify my coffee machine's quantum signature and broadcast it at that alien fleet? Theoretically, if we hit the right frequency, it could disrupt their power systems. But Jake, we'd need to boost the signal by a factor of about 10 million. Our ship's power grid couldn't handle that kind of load." Jake looked around the bridge, at his friends and colleagues. These were people who had trusted him to keep their ship running in the depths of space, far from any help or support. They were miners and engineers, not soldiers. But they were human, and humans had a long history of doing impossible things when their backs were against the wall. "Sam," Jake said quietly, How do you feel about rebuilding every power system on this ship in the next few hours? Sam Tucker grinned. Jake, I thought you'd never ask. Outside the ship, the alien fleet began moving toward the planet, their perfect formations cutting through space like knives through silk. Jake Morrison wiped his hands on a dirty towel and stepped back from his coffee machine. The old thing hummed quietly in the corner of the engineering bay, looking nothing like the sleek equipment that filled the rest of the ship. While everything else on the new frontier was built for space travel, Jake's coffee maker looked like it belonged in someone's kitchen back on Earth. But Jake knew better. He had spent 3 years modifying that machine, adding parts he had found in junkyards and crashed ships. The heating elements came from a military research vessel that had blown up near Mars. Jake never asked too many questions about where things came from. He just knew how to make them work better. The coffee finished brewing with a soft beep. Jake poured himself a cup and took a slow sip. Perfect temperature, perfect taste. The quantum heating elements he had installed made sure every cup was exactly right. Most people thought he was crazy for caring so much about coffee, but Jake believed that good coffee was the foundation of good engineering. Jake, you in here? Kelly Barnes called from the doorway. She was his assistant engineer, young and eager to learn everything about keeping a mining ship running in deep space. Always am, Jake replied, not looking up from his console. Scrolled across the screen showing the status of every system on the ship. The new frontier was old, but well-maintained. Jake made sure of that. Kelly walked over and looked at the coffee machine. Still don't understand why you spend so much time on that thing. We have food dispensers that make coffee. Jake looked at her with the expression he usually saved for people who suggested using duct tape to fix a reactor leak. Kelly, that dispenser makes brown water that tastes like recycled air filters. This, he patted the coffee machine gently, this makes coffee that reminds you why being human is worth the trouble. Before Kelly could respond, the ship's communication system crackled to life. Captain Lisa Hayes' voice filled the engineering bay, tense and urgent. All senior staff report to the bridge immediately. We have a situation. Jake and Kelly exchanged looks. In 3 years of mining operations on Kepler 442b, they had never heard the captain sound worried. Jake grabbed his coffee cup and headed for the door. The bridge was crowded when they arrived. Captain Hayes stood in the center, her face grim as she watched the main display screen. Communications Officer Danny Rodriguez sat at his station, fingers flying over his controls as he tried to clean up a transmission signal. "What's the problem, Captain?" Jake asked, taking another sip of his coffee. Hayes pointed at the screen. "We just received this message from Earth Command. Danny, play it back." The screen flickered and showed a man in a military uniform. His face was pale and his voice shook as he spoke. All human colonies in sectors 7 through 12 are hereby ordered to prepare for immediate evacuation. An alien fleet has been detected approaching your area. The aliens call themselves the Veltar Dominion. They have demanded complete surrender of all human territories. Any colony that resists will face what they call planetary cleansing. The message continued with technical details about the alien fleet. But Jake stopped listening when he heard about their main weapon. The World Breaker, they called it. A ship so large it could crack planets in half using focused gravity waves. "How long do we have?" Jake asked. "The message is already 6 hours old," Hayes replied. "With their speed, they could be here in a day, maybe less." Mining Director Helen Carter spoke up from her position near the navigation console. "We need to start evacuating immediately. The transport ships can carry maybe 2,000 people, at most. We have over 15,000 miners and support staff on the planet. Jake finished his coffee and set the empty cup down on a nearby shelf. What about the defense fleet? Hayes shook her head. Nearest human warships are 3 weeks away. We're on our own. The bridge fell silent except for the quiet hum of the ship's systems. Jake looked around at the worried faces of his crewmates. These were good people, hard-working folks who had come to the edge of human space to dig rare metals out of an alien world. They deserved better than being vaporized by some alien empire with delusions of superiority. Captain, Jake said quietly, what do we know about these Veltar? Rodriguez looked up from his station. I've been monitoring their transmissions. They seem to think humans are primitive scavengers, not worth their time except as an example to other species. Primitive, Jake repeated, tasting the word. That's interesting. Kelly looked at him strangely. Jake, you're not seriously thinking about fighting them, are you? They have a ship that can break planets. Kelly, I've been fixing impossible problems for 20 years. Started when I was 12 and my dad's tractor broke down during harvest. Season, learned that most problems aren't really impossible, they just look that way until you find the right angle to attack them from. Hayes studied Jake's face. What are you thinking, Chief? Jake picked up his coffee cup and realized it was empty. He walked over to his machine and started another pot brewing. I'm thinking that any species arrogant enough to call their weapon. The Worldbreaker probably has some serious blind spots in their thinking. Jake, Carter said slowly. They're aliens with technology we can't even understand. What could we possibly do against them? Jake watched his coffee machine work, listening to the familiar sounds of water heating and beans grinding. The quantum elements hummed at a frequency that most people couldn't hear, but Jake had trained his ear to catch it over the years. Helen, you ever notice how the most advanced solutions are usually the most fragile ones? Take our mining equipment. The newer stuff breaks down twice as often as the old machines because it's too complicated. Too many parts that have to work perfectly together. Hayes was beginning to understand where Jake was going with this. You think their technology might have weaknesses? Everything has weaknesses, Jake replied as his coffee finished brewing. The trick is finding them before they find yours. The ship's long-range sensors began beeping. Rodriguez checked his readings, and his face went pale. Captain, I'm picking up massive energy signatures at the edge of the system. Multiple contacts, moving fast. Hayes moved to the sensor station. How many? 12 ships, maybe more. And Captain... Rodriguez paused, checking his readings again. One of them is huge. I mean, bigger than anything in our database. Jake poured his fresh coffee and took a careful sip. Still perfect. He looked around the bridge at his friends and colleagues, people who had trusted him to keep their ship running, in the hostile environment of deep space. Well, he said calmly, looks like we're about to meet the neighbors. Kelly, I'm going to need you to help me with some modifications to our systems. What kind of modifications? Kelly asked. Jake smiled and raised his coffee cup in a mock toast. The kind that'll either save the colony or give us the most expensive funeral in human history. Outside the ship, stars began to flicker as massive shapes moved between them and the distant sun. Lisa's first stop was not at a military base or a government building. Instead, she went to a small town in Kansas where her older brother Danny lived. Danny Kane was a mechanic who fixed cars and trucks for a living. He had never been to space and had no interest in alien politics. Lisa found him in his garage covered in oil and grease, working on an old pickup truck that looked like it should have been scrapped years ago. "Hey, Danny," she said, leaning against the garage door. Danny looked up from under the hood. Lisa, what brings you here? Thought you were done with all that space hero stuff. Apparently not. I need your help with something. Danny wiped his hands on a dirty rag. Let me guess, more aliens causing trouble? Something like that. Remember when we were kids and you used to take apart every machine in the house to see how it worked? Mom was not happy about that. Danny laughed, especially when I took apart the washing machine. You also put it back together so it worked. Better than before. I need someone who can look at alien technology and figure out how to improve it or break it. Danny raised an eyebrow. Alien technology? Lisa explained about the Devourers and their planet-sized ship. She told him about the advanced technology that was supposedly impossible to understand or defeat. When she finished, Danny was quiet for a moment. Then he grinned. So basically, you want me to hot rod a spaceship? More like figure out how to hot rod our entire defense fleet. Danny threw the dirty rag over his shoulder. When do we start? Lisa's next stop was a university in California. She found Dr. Maria Santos in her laboratory, surrounded by computers and mathematical equations that covered 3 whiteboards. Maria was one of the smartest people on Earth, a physicist who specialized in things that most people could not even pronounce. "Lisa," Maria said, looking up from a computer screen full of numbers. "I heard you were back on Earth. How was the vacation from saving the galaxy?" "Short," Lisa said. "I need someone who understands how the universe really works. Not how we think it works, but how it actually works." Maria pushed her glasses up her nose. "That is a pretty big request. What are we dealing with?" Lisa explained. About the Devourers again. She mentioned the technology that seemed impossible and the weapons that could destroy entire galaxies. Maria listened carefully, asking questions about energy signatures and propulsion systems. When Lisa finished, Maria was already drawing diagrams on a whiteboard. "Interesting," Maria said. "If what you are telling me is accurate, these Devourers are using physics that should not be possible according to our current understanding. So, we cannot beat them?" Maria smiled. "I did not say that. I said their technology should not be possible according to our current understanding. Maybe our understanding is wrong. Can you figure out how their technology works?" "I can try, but I will need to see it first." Lisa's third stop was more difficult. She had to travel to a small military base in Colorado where Captain Jake Morrison was training new pilots. Jake had been with Lisa during the tournament and was one of the few humans who really understood what the galaxy was like. She found him in a flight simulator, teaching a young pilot how to handle a spacecraft in zero gravity. "Nice landing," Jake said to the pilot. "Try not to crash into the space station next time." The pilot climbed out of the simulator, looking embarrassed. "Yes, sir. Sorry, sir." After the pilot left, Jake turned to Lisa. "Let me guess. The galaxy needs saving again?" "How did you know?" "Because you only visit me when something terrible is about to happen. What is it this time?" Lisa told him about the Devourers. Jake listened without interrupting, his expression getting more serious with each detail. "So," Jake said when she finished, "we are facing enemies who can destroy galaxies, and you want me to help you fight them with a few human spaceships and whatever alien allies we can find." "That is about right." Jake was quiet for a moment, then started laughing. "You know what? Why not? Life was getting boring anyway." 3 days later, Lisa stood on the bridge of the human flagship Defiance Edge, looking out at the largest military fleet in galactic history. Ships from 50 different species had gathered at the edge of human space. Some were as small as fighter jets, others were as big as cities. All of them were crewed by beings who had decided that even a small chance of survival was better than surrendering to the Devourers. General Corax was there with a battle group from the Siege Breakers. Dr. Zephyr had brought research ships from the Crystalline Collective. Admiral Swift commanded the main Galactic Defense Force fleet. Even Unity had come, its consciousness distributed across a dozen crystal ships, but the most interesting ship in the fleet was also the smallest. Danny had spent 2 days working on a modified human transport ship using alien technology in ways that made the alien engineers nervous. "Are you sure this will work?" Dr. Zephyr asked, looking at Danny's modifications. Danny wiped grease off his hands. "No idea, but it should be fun to find out." Maria was on the bridge, surrounded by computers and sensors that were analyzing data from across the galaxy. She had been studying the Devourer ship for days, trying to understand how it worked. "Any progress?" Lisa asked. Maria looked up from her screens. "Some. The good news is that their technology follows the same basic physical laws as ours. The bad news is that they are using those laws in ways we never thought of. Can we beat them? Maybe. I have some ideas, but they are pretty crazy." Jake was at the navigation station, plotting courses and calculating travel times. "The Devourer. Ship will reach the outer rim of our galaxy in 3 months. We need to intercept them before they get close to any inhabited systems." Lisa nodded. "How long to get there?" 2 months, if we push the engines hard. "And then?" Jake shrugged. "Then we find out if humans really are as adaptable as everyone thinks we are." Lisa looked out at the fleet of ships surrounding them. Thousands of beings from dozens of different worlds, all working together because they had learned that cooperation was stronger than fighting alone. "All right, everyone," she said into the fleet communication system. "Let's go meet these Devourers and show them what happens when they threaten our galaxy." The fleet began moving, hundreds of ships accelerating toward the edge of known space. Behind them, billions of beings watched and waited, hoping that this strange alliance between humans and aliens would be enough to save them all. In her private quarters, Lisa sat down and wrote a letter to her parents. She told them she loved them and that she was proud to be human. She did not mention that she might not come back from this mission. After all, there was no point in worrying them about something that might not happen. Besides, she was starting to get curious about these Devourers. Any species that could destroy entire galaxies had to have some interesting tricks. Lisa Kane had always liked learning new tricks. Jake Morrison's coffee machine sat in the center of what used to be the New Frontier's main cargo bay. Now the space looked like the aftermath of a controlled explosion. Power cables snaked across the floor in every direction, connecting the innocent-looking appliance to every major system on the ship. "This is insane," Kelly Barnes muttered as she welded another power coupling into place. Sparks flew from her torch, adding to the dozens of scorch marks already decorating the walls. "Insane is relative," Jake replied, carefully adjusting the quantum elements inside his coffee machine. 6 months ago, using a kitchen appliance to fight aliens would have been insane. Today, it's just Tuesday with higher stakes. Sam Tucker emerged from behind a massive power conduit, his coveralls stained with grease and his hair standing up from electrical discharge. "Jake, I've rerouted power from life support, navigation, weapons, and artificial gravity. We're running on backup everything. One surge and this ship becomes a very expensive piece of space junk." Jake nodded without looking up from his work. "Sam, how long have you been fixing things that shouldn't work?" "About 30 years. Why?" then you know that half of engineering is making things work that have no right to work in the first place. Jake made a tiny adjustment to one of the quantum elements. The other half is having enough coffee to stay awake while you do it. Danny Rodriguez called out from his position at a jury-rigged control station. Jake, I'm getting updates on the alien fleet. They're moving into position around the planet. Looks like they're preparing for their final attack. Through the cargo bay's viewing port, they could see the lights of the Veltar ships as they arranged themselves in a perfect sphere around Kepler 442b. The World Breaker hung at the center of the formation, like a predator preparing to strike. Dr. Amy Foster, the colony's lead scientist, floated into the cargo bay using the handholds welded to the walls. Without artificial gravity, everyone had to move carefully to avoid damaging the delicate equipment. Jake, I finished the calculations you requested, she said, pulling herself over to his workstation. If your theory is correct, the frequency has to be precise to within 0.0001 terahertz. Any variation and the alien systems will adapt to compensate. Jake looked up from the coffee machine's internal components. Amy, in your professional opinion as a scientist, what are the chances this plan will work? Dr. Foster was quiet for a moment, studying the impossible collection of cables and components that filled the cargo bay. Honestly, about 1 in 10,000. The engineering challenges alone should make this impossible. But, Jake prompted, I've been watching you work for the past 4 hours. You're not approaching this like a normal engineering problem. You're treating it like art, like you're composing music instead of building a weapon. Jake smiled and made another microscopic adjustment to the quantum elements. Amy, good engineering is art. It's about seeing connections that other people miss, finding harmony in systems that look chaotic. Kelly pulled herself over to join the conversation. Jake, can you explain again how this is supposed to work? I understand the theory, but the practical application still seems impossible. Jake gestured to the coffee machine's exposed components. These quantum elements heat water by creating perfect resonance at the molecular level. Every water molecule vibrates at exactly the right frequency to produce optimal temperature. The aliens' technology works the same way, but on a massive scale. He pointed to the power cables running throughout the cargo bay. We're taking that resonance and amplifying it through every system on the ship. Instead of heating water, we're broadcasting a quantum signal that should interfere with their power systems. Like tuning forks, Dr. Foster added. Hit one and others nearby start vibrating at the same frequency. Exactly, Jake said. Except instead of making sound, we're making their perfect technology very imperfect very quickly. Rodriguez's voice crackled over the communication system. Jake, you need to see this. The aliens are broadcasting another message. Jake pulled himself over to the viewing port where a portable display screen showed Admiral Zek Thar standing on the bridge of the World Breaker. The alien commander looked even more arrogant than before, if that was possible. Humans of this pathetic colony, Admiral Zek Thar said through the universal translator, your time has expired. You have made no attempt to surrender, shown no recognition of your obvious inferiority. This is disappointing but not unexpected from such primitive creatures. The camera view shifted to show the World Breaker's main weapon charging up. Energy crackled along the massive ship's hull as power built to unimaginable levels. Observe the price of defying the Veltar Dominion, Admiral Zek Thar continued. Your world will be broken apart as an example to other inferior species who might consider resistance. Jake watched the alien weapon charging and felt something cold settle in his stomach. They had maybe 10 minutes before the World Breaker fired. 10 minutes to test a plan that had never been tried before, using equipment that was held together with determination and spare parts. Sam, Kelly, positions, Jake called out. Danny, start broadcasting on all frequencies. I want every alien ship in the system to hear this. What should I tell them? Rodriguez asked. Jake floated over to his coffee machine and placed his hand on its familiar surface. The metal was warm from the quantum elements inside, humming with barely contained power. Tell them that Chief Engineer Jake Morrison of the bar, mining vessel New Frontier, would like to demonstrate something they probably haven't seen before. Kelly strapped herself into the improvised control station they had built around the coffee machine. Jake, the power readings are off the charts. If this doesn't work, we're going to blow every system on the ship. And if we don't try, everyone on the planet dies anyway, Jake replied. Sometimes the only choice is between different kinds of impossible. Dr. Foster checked her calculations one more time. Jake, the frequency has to be exact. Too high and nothing happens. Too low and we might accidentally help them instead of hurting them. Jake looked around the cargo bay at his friends and colleagues. These were good people who had followed him into this insane plan because they trusted his engineering skills and his stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Amy, in 30 years of fixing things, I've learned that precision isn't about having perfect tools. It's about understanding what you're trying to accomplish and why. Jake began the startup sequence for his modified coffee machine. I've been making perfect coffee with this machine for 3 years. Today, we're going to make something even better. The quantum elements inside the coffee machine began to glow as power flowed through systems that had never been designed to handle such loads. Throughout the ship, every circuit, every conduit, every spare wire that Sam and Kelly had installed began to carry the resonance pattern that Jake had spent years perfecting. Power levels rising, Kelly reported, her voice tight with concentration. 50%, 75%. Jake, we're approaching maximum safe levels. Through the viewing port, the Worldbreaker's weapon reached full charge. The massive alien ship began to turn toward the planet, preparing to deliver the killing blow that would crack Kepler 442b like an egg. Frequency locked in, Dr. Foster announced. We're broadcasting at exactly the right resonance. Jake watched his coffee machine work, listening to the familiar sounds of quantum elements heating and harmonizing. But now, instead of preparing his morning cup of coffee, the machine was broadcasting a signal that carried 30 years of human engineering, experience into the heart of an alien fleet. Broadcasting now, Danny Rodriguez called out. Jake smiled and made one final adjustment to the coffee machine's controls. Let's see how perfect alien technology handles a little human improvisation. The quantum signal flowed out from the new frontier like ripples in a pond, carrying the chaotic harmony of human engineering towards ships that had never known imperfection. 3 hours after the Worldbreaker's main weapon failed, the last Veltar ship limped out of the Kepler 442b system. Jake Morrison watched them go from the bridge of the New Frontier, a fresh cup of coffee in his hands and a small smile on his face. Sensor readings confirm it, Danny Rodriguez announced. The alien fleet is retreating. All ships are showing major system failures. Captain Lisa Hayes slumped in her command chair, exhaustion written across her face. Jake, remind me to never doubt your engineering again, Captain. I told you it would either work or give us the most expensive funeral in human history. Jake took a sip of his coffee. I'm just glad it worked. Kelly Barnes floated into the bridge, her coveralls stained with grease and her hair wild from hours of emergency repairs. Jake, we've got the ship's systems mostly back online. The power grid is holding, but it's going to need a complete rebuild before we try anything like this again. Are we planning to try anything like this again? Dr. Amy Foster asked as she joined them on the bridge. Jake considered the question while watching the stars through the main viewing screen. Amy, I hope not. Fighting aliens is interesting work, but I prefer mining. Less chance of accidentally destroying the ship. Sam Tucker's voice came over the communication system from the engine room. Jake, you down there? We've got company. Incoming. What kind of company? Captain Hayes asked. The good kind, Sam replied. 3 Earth Defense Force battleships just dropped out of faster-than-light travel. Looks like the cavalry arrived just in time to miss the party. Within an hour, the bridge of the New Frontier was crowded with military officers who had traveled across space to investigate reports of a mining ship defeating an advanced alien fleet with kitchen appliances. The story sounded ridiculous, even to the people who had lived through it. Admiral Patricia Stone, commander of the relief fleet, studied Jake with the expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle. Chief Morrison, I've read the preliminary reports, but I need to hear this directly. From you. You defeated an alien dreadnought using a coffee machine? Well, Admiral, it's a very good coffee machine, Jake replied seriously. I've been working on it for 3 years. Admiral Stone looked around the bridge at the jury-rigged equipment and emergency repairs that covered every surface. Chief, our best military engineers have been studying the sensor readings from your battle. They say what you accomplished should have been impossible. Jake shrugged. Admiral, impossible is just a word people use when they haven't found the right approach. Yet, the right approach? Admiral Stone repeated slowly. Chief, you turned a beverage dispenser into a weapon capable of disrupting technology centuries ahead of our own. How is that possible? Kelly Barnes spoke up from her position at the engineering station. Admiral, Jake sees connections that other people miss. He looks at broken systems and figures out how to make them work better than they did when they were new. It's not magic, Jake added. It's just engineering. Good engineering is about understanding what you're trying to accomplish and using whatever tools you have available. Admiral Stone walked over to examine Jake's coffee machine, which had been moved back to its original position in the corner of the bridge. The innocent-looking appliance hummed quietly, showing no signs of its recent role in defeating an alien invasion. Chief Morrison, Earth Command is prepared to offer you any position you want in the Defense Force. We need engineers who can think like you do. Jake finished his coffee and set the empty cup down on a nearby console. Admiral, I appreciate the offer, but I'm happy where I am. The New Frontier is a good ship with a good crew. We've got mining quotas to meet. Jake, Captain Hayes said quietly, you just saved 15,000 lives and possibly changed the course of human history. Don't you want recognition for that? Jake looked around the bridge at his friends and colleagues. These were people who had trusted him when he proposed using a coffee machine to fight aliens. They had followed his plan even when it seemed insane, worked for hours to rebuild their ship's power systems, and never once suggested that maybe they should just run away. Captain, I already have all the recognition I need. I've got a ship that runs better than it has any right to, a crew that can fix anything with enough determination, and coffee that reminds me why being human is worth the trouble. Admiral Stone studied Jake for a long moment. Chief, you realize that news of this victory is going to spread throughout human space, don't you? You're going to be famous whether you want to be or not. That's fine, Jake replied. Fame is temporary. Good engineering lasts forever. Dr. Foster, who had been quietly reviewing her data recordings, looked up from her portable workstation. Jake, I've been analyzing the quantum frequencies you used to disrupt the alien systems. The mathematical principles behind your approach could revolutionize our understanding of technology integration. Amy, Mathematics is just a way of describing what works and what doesn't. I didn't invent anything new. I just used what I had in a way that nobody expected. Danny Rodriguez turned from his communication station. Jake, I'm getting reports from across human space. The Veltar Dominion is collapsing. Their subject species are rebelling, saying that if humans could defeat the mighty Veltar, then they can fight for their freedom too. Jake poured himself another cup of coffee and considered this information. That's good news for a lot of people who have been living under alien rule. It's more than good news, Admiral Stone said. Chief Morrison, your victory here has shifted the balance of power in this entire region of space. The Veltar Empire is finished. Admiral, empires rise and fall all the time. What matters is what comes after. Jake took a careful sip of his coffee. The universe is a big place with a lot of different species trying to make their way in it. Maybe now they'll have more chances to figure things out for themselves. Sam Tucker emerged from the engine room, his coveralls even dirtier than usual, but a satisfied expression on his face. Jake, I've got the ship running smooth as silk again. Better than before, actually. Turns out all that power routing we did improved several systems. That's good, Sam. We've got a mining operation to get back to. Admiral Stone shook her head in amazement. Chief, you defeat an alien empire and immediately want to go back to mining asteroids? Jake looked out at the stars through the main viewing screen. Somewhere out there, people were probably telling stories about the human engineer who fought aliens with a coffee machine. The stories would grow and change with each telling, until eventually they bore little resemblance to what actually happened. But that was fine with Jake. Stories were just another form of engineering, building something new out of raw materials and imagination. Admiral, mining is honest work. You find something valuable, dig it up, and make people's lives a little better. Fighting aliens was necessary, but I don't want to make a career out of it. Captain Hayes stood up from her command chair. Admiral Stone, Chief Morrison has given you his answer. If Earth Command wants to honor what we did here, the best way is to let us get back to the work we came here to do. Admiral Stone nodded slowly. Very well. But Chief Morrison, if you ever change your mind about that position in the Defense Force, the offer stands. I'll keep that in mind, Admiral. As the military officers prepared to return to their ships, Jake walked over to his coffee machine and began preparing another pot. The familiar routine of measuring beans and checking water temperature helped him process everything that had happened. Kelly joined him at the machine. Jake, do you ever wonder what would have happened if the coffee machine hadn't worked? Jake considered the question while listening to the quiet hum of quantum elements heating water to the perfect temperature. Kelly, I've learned that wondering about what might have happened is less useful than focusing on what needs to happen next. And what needs to happen next? Jake smiled as his coffee finished brewing. We need to recalibrate the mining equipment, check the ship's systems, and make sure we have enough supplies for the next 3 months of operations. That's it? That's everything, Jake replied, pouring himself a fresh cup. Good work, good friends, and good coffee. Everything else is just details. Outside the ship, the stars continued their ancient dance across the void, unchanged by the brief drama that had played out in one small corner of the galaxy. But for 15,000 miners and their families, and for countless other species now free from Veltar rule, the universe had become a slightly better place. And in the engineering bay of the new frontier, a coffee machine hummed quietly to itself, ready to make the perfect cup whenever its owner needed reminding that being human was worth all the trouble it caused. 6 months after the Battle of Kepler 442b, Jake Morrison was elbow-deep in a malfunctioning ore processor when Kelly Barnes came running into the engineering bay with a communication pad in her hands. "Jake, you need to see this," she said, her voice filled with excitement. Jake wiped his hands on a towel and looked at the message on Kelly's pad. It was from Captain Maria Santos of the exploration vessel Deep Horizon, operating in the Vega sector. "Chief Morrison, we have encountered a species called the Kethvar, who claim to have heard stories about the human who defeated the Veltar, with something called a coffee machine. They are requesting to meet with you personally. They say they have been enslaved by another alien empire for 300 years and want to learn human engineering methods." Jake read the message twice, then handed the pad back to Kelly. "That's nice. Did you finish checking the atmospheric processors like I asked?" Kelly stared at him. "Jake, did you hear what I just read? An entire alien species wants to meet you because of what you did to the Veltar." "I heard it," Jake replied, returning to work on the ore processor. "But this machine still needs fixing, and we have quotas to meet." Captain Lisa Hayes entered the engineering bay, carrying her own communication pad. "Jake, I just received 3 more messages like that one. Species from across the galaxy are asking for meetings with the human engineer who breaks impossible technology." Jake sighed and put down his tools. "Captain, I fixed one problem with one alien fleet. That doesn't make me some kind of galactic hero." "Maybe not," Hayes replied, "but apparently word has spread pretty far. Danny is monitoring communication channels across human space. Everyone is talking about what happened here. Danny Rodriguez appeared in the doorway of the engineering bay. Jake, you should hear some of these stories. One version says you built a giant robot out of mining equipment. Another claims you used ancient human magic to curse the alien ships." "Magic," Jake repeated flatly. "The best one says you challenged Admiral Zekthar to single combat and defeated him using only a wrench and your natural human strength," Danny continued with a grin. Jake looked around at his friends and crewmates. "So what you're telling me is that people are spreading completely made-up stories about something that actually happened." "That's how legends work," Dr. Amy Foster said as she joined the group in the engineering bay. "The facts get mixed up with what people want the facts to be." Jake poured himself a cup of coffee from his machine, which sat in its usual corner looking completely ordinary. "Amy, what are the facts?" "The facts are that your victory over the Veltar has encouraged 12 different species to rebel against. They're alien overlords. 3 major empires have collapsed in the past 6 months. The balance of power in this entire region of space has shifted." Jake took a sip of his coffee and considered this information. "That's a lot of change happening very quickly." "It gets more interesting," Dr. Foster continued. "I've been in communication with scientists from Earth. They want to study your coffee machine and the principles you use to disrupt the Veltar technology." "What did you tell them?" "I told them that the machine itself isn't special. It's how you used it that made the difference." Jake nodded approvingly. "That's exactly right. The coffee machine is just a tool. Any engineer with enough determination could have done the same thing." Sam Tucker emerged from behind a large piece of machinery, his coveralls covered in grease stains. "Jake, that's not entirely true. I've been working with machines for 40 years, and I've never seen anyone make connections the way you do." "Sam, you rebuilt half this ship's power grid in 4 hours. That's not normal engineering either." "Maybe," Sam admitted. "But Jake, you saw possibilities that the rest of us missed. You looked at a kitchen appliance and saw a weapon that could defeat an alien empire." Kelly was studying her communication pad again. Jake, there's something else. The Earth Defense Force is asking if you would be willing to train other engineers. In your methods. Jake set down his coffee cup and looked at each of his friends in turn. These were good people who had followed him into an impossible situation and somehow come out the other side. They deserved honest answers to their questions. Training people to think like engineers isn't something you can do in a classroom, he said finally. It's something you learn by fixing things that are broken, solving problems that seem impossible, and never giving up when the easy solutions don't work. Captain Hayes pulled up a chair and sat down facing Jake. Chief, I think what everyone is trying to tell you is that what you did here was special. Not just the technical achievement, but the way you approached an impossible problem. Every problem is impossible until someone figures out how to solve it, Jake replied. But most people give up before they find the solution, Dr. Foster added. You didn't give up. Even when facing technology centuries ahead of our own, you found a way to turn our limitations into advantages. Jake walked over to his coffee machine and ran his hand along its familiar surface. The quantum elements inside hummed quietly, the same sound they had made every morning for 3 years. I didn't do anything special, he said quietly. I just used what I had available and refused to accept that the problem couldn't be solved. Jake, Kelly said, maybe that's what makes it special. Danny Rodriguez held up his communication pad. Jake, I just received another message. This one is different. It's from a human colony in the Centauri system. They're having problems with their terraforming equipment, and they're asking if you could help them figure out what's wrong. Jake looked at the message and felt something familiar stir in his chest. It was the same feeling he got when he encountered a broken machine that everyone else had given up on. What kind of problems? He asked. Atmospheric processors are failing, but they can't figure out why. The equipment is working perfectly according to all diagnostic tests, but the atmosphere isn't stabilizing. Jake was quiet for a moment, thinking about atmospheric processors and the thousands of variables that could cause them to malfunction in ways that diagnostic systems couldn't detect. Captain, he said finally, how long would it take to get to the Centauri system? Hayes smiled. About 3 weeks if we push the engines. Are you thinking of taking a vacation from mining? I'm thinking that broken atmospheric processors affect real people who need clean air to breathe, Jake replied. And fixing things that are broken is what engineers do. Sam Tucker grinned. Jake, you realize that if we help solve their problems, word is going to spread even further. More people are going to want our help with their impossible engineering challenges. Jake poured himself another cup of coffee and looked around at his friends. Sam, there are a lot of broken things in the galaxy. If we can fix a few of them, that seems like worthwhile work. Better than fighting aliens? Kelly asked. Much better, Jake confirmed. Fighting is sometimes necessary, but building things and fixing things, that's what makes life worth living. Captain Hayes stood up and headed toward the bridge. Chief Morrison, set course for the Centauri system. Looks like the new frontier is going back to work. As his friends dispersed to prepare for their new mission, Jake remained in the engineering bay with his coffee machine. Outside the ship, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, and somewhere among them, people were struggling with problems that seemed impossible to solve. Jake smiled and took another sip of his perfect coffee. There was always another broken machine waiting to be fixed, another impossible problem waiting for the right human engineer to come along and prove it wasn't impossible after all. The new frontier dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Centauri system, and Jake Morrison immediately knew something was wrong. The readings on his engineering console showed atmospheric composition levels that made no sense. Captain, Are you seeing this? Jake called out to Captain Lisa Hayes on the bridge. I'm seeing it, but I don't understand it, Hayes replied over the communication system. The colony's atmospheric processors are running at full capacity, but the planet's air is getting worse instead of better. Jake studied the sensor data more carefully. New Geneva, the human colony on Centauri Prime, had been terraforming their world for 15 years. The atmospheric processors should have created breathable air across most of the planet by now. Instead, the oxygen levels were dropping and toxic gases were increasing. Danny, open a channel to the colony, Jake said to Communications Officer Danny Rodriguez. A tired-looking woman appeared on the main screen. She had the pale complexion of someone who had been spending too much time in sealed buildings, breathing recycled air. This is Director Susan Walsh of New Geneva Colony. Are you the New Frontier? That's us, Captain Hayes replied. Director Walsh, we received your message about atmospheric processing problems. Chief Engineer Jake Morrison is here to help. Director Walsh's expression changed to one of relief, mixed with skepticism. You're the engineer who defeated the Veltar with a coffee machine? Jake sighed. Director, I'm an engineer who knows how to fix broken machines. Can you tell me about your atmospheric processors? We have 67 processing stations spread across 3 continents, Director Walsh explained. Each one is working perfectly according to every diagnostic test we can run. But the atmosphere isn't improving. In fact, it's getting worse. When did you first notice the problem? Jake asked. About 3 months ago. The oxygen levels started dropping. Slowly at first, then faster. We've had to put everyone on emergency life support systems. Jake looked at the sensor readings again, focusing on the patterns of atmospheric change across the planet's surface. Something about the data reminded him of a problem he had encountered years ago with a mining operation's air recycling system. Director, I need to ask you something that might sound strange, Jake said. Have you made any changes to the processing stations recently? Any upgrades or modifications? Director Walsh nodded. We installed new efficiency modules 6 months ago. They were supposed to increase processing capacity by 30%. Jake felt the familiar stirring of understanding that came when he started to see the real shape of a problem. Who made these efficiency modules? A company called Stellar Dynamics. They specialize in terraforming equipment. The modules came with perfect compatibility ratings for our existing systems. Jake looked at Kelly Barnes, who was monitoring the conversation from the engineering station. She was beginning to understand where Jake's questions were leading. Director, Jake continued, I'm going to need detailed specifications for both your original atmospheric processors and these new efficiency modules. Can you transmit that data to us? Of course, but Chief Morrison, our best engineers have been working on this problem for months. If the equipment is working properly, what else could be causing the atmospheric degradation? Jake smiled grimly. Director, sometimes the problem isn't that the equipment is broken. Sometimes the problem is that the equipment is working exactly the way it's supposed to work. 20 minutes later, Jake sat in the New Frontiers engineering bay with Dr. Amy Foster and Sam Tucker, studying the technical specifications that Director Walsh had transmitted. The atmospheric processors were indeed working perfectly, converting atmospheric gases according to their programming. Jake, I see what you're getting at, Dr. Foster said, pointing to specific sections of the efficiency module documentation. These new modules are designed to optimize the conversion process. Optimize how? Sam asked. Jake highlighted several lines of technical specifications on his display screen. They're programmed to prioritize processing efficiency over atmospheric balance. The modules are converting oxygen into other compounds because that's a more energy-efficient process. Kelly, who had been listening from her workstation, looked confused. But that doesn't make sense. Why would terraforming equipment be designed to reduce oxygen levels? Because, Jake said slowly, these efficiency modules weren't designed for terraforming. They were designed for something else entirely. Dr. Foster was studying the molecular conversion patterns shown in the specifications. Jake, these processing algorithms, they're not optimized for creating breathable atmospheres. They're optimized for industrial chemical production. Exactly, Jake confirmed. Someone sold the colony industrial equipment disguised as terraforming. Upgrades. Sam Tucker leaned back in his chair and whistled softly. That's either a massive mistake or deliberate sabotage. Jake opened a communication channel to Director Walsh. Director, I need to ask you about Stellar Dynamics, the company that sold you the efficiency modules. Director Walsh appeared on the screen again, looking even more tired than before. What about them? How did you hear about their products? Did they contact you, or did you find them? They contacted us about 8 months ago, said they had heard about our terraforming project and wanted to offer us upgraded equipment at a significant discount. Jake exchanged looks with his crew. Director, have you tried to contact Stellar Dynamics since the problem started? We've tried, but their communication channels are no longer active. It's like the company just disappeared. Jake was quiet. For a moment, thinking about companies that appeared out of nowhere, sold defective equipment, then vanished when problems arose. It was a pattern he had encountered before in the mining industry. Director Walsh, we're going to need to physically examine one of your atmospheric processors. Can you arrange transport to the nearest processing station? Of course, but Chief Morrison, even if you identify the problem, how can we fix it? We have 67 processing stations spread across the planet. Replacing all the efficiency modules would take months and cost more than we can afford. Jake poured himself a cup of coffee from his machine and considered the problem. 67 atmospheric processors, all running corrupted programming that was slowly poisoning the planet's atmosphere. The colony couldn't afford to replace the equipment, and they couldn't survive much longer with the deteriorating air quality. Director, how long can your emergency life support systems keep the colony running? Maybe 6 weeks at current consumption rates. Jake took a sip of his coffee and looked around the engineering bay. His friends were watching him with the same expression they had worn when he proposed fighting the Veltar with a coffee machine. They knew he was working toward a solution that would probably sound impossible. Captain Hayes, Jake called out over the communication system. How long would it take to get to the planet's surface? About 4 hours in the shuttle, Hayes replied. Why? Because I want to take a look at one of those atmospheric processors in person. And I want to bring my coffee machine. Kelly stared at him. Jake, please tell me you're not planning to fix the entire planet's atmosphere with kitchen appliances. Jake smiled and patted his coffee machine affectionately. Kelly, you know what they say about impossible problems. They're just problems that haven't met the right human yet, Kelly replied with a sigh. Exactly. And Director Walsh's colony is about to meet some very determined humans with a really excellent coffee machine. Outside the ship, Centauri Prime hung in space like a blue-green marble slowly turning brown as its atmosphere continued to deteriorate. But in the engineering bay of the New Frontier, Jake Morrison was already working on a solution that would either save 15,000 colonists or give them the most caffeinated failure in terraforming history. Either way, the coffee was going to be perfect.